the aspect ratio instead of stretched, just make it normal.
صباح الخير جميعاً. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to the second day of Hanger Talks. If I could please request for all of you to be caffeinated, bring your coffees, and please have your seats. So we can start off with the most amazing Travis Holland that has set multiple world records. He has Shepherd Aero, and it's a company that focuses on structuring flight plans and multiple other services that are innovative within the aviation industry. So please have your seats, bring your coffees, and we'll start in 2 more minutes. So up until they start? Yes. Are you comfortable here or do you want to? I'm good here. All right, so Travis Holland, of course, I don't think I can do him justice by speaking of his amazing experience, his amazing world-setting records. So Travis, would you like to say a few words before we start? Yes, and if I can request again for you, ladies and gentlemen, to just have a seat and be prepared to be inspired.
Good morning. I want to first give a very special thanks to the Space Commission, the Saudi Aviation Club, and of course, Prince Sultan bin Salman, His Royal Highness, for putting on this amazing event and bringing us all together. One of the things that always happens when I come to an aviation event is I'm humbled by the amazing aviators that I get to be in the company with. So it's really an honor to be here with so many great aviators and folks. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, and we are honored to have you here as well.
So just before we get started, my company, Shepherd Aero, we do a variety of services: international trip support, ferry flights, VIP turbine aircraft training, and around the world owner-flown adventures. In short, if it's unusual and international, we're probably useful.
That is truly innovative. Would you like to sit down? So you are the people that people go to for the hard stuff, right? For the hard missions, international missions that are difficult.
Yep, especially in light aircraft. Light aircraft across oceans is part of our specialty. So,
beautiful. And would you mind telling us why Shepherd Aero? Why the name Shepherd Aero?
So our vision with Shepherd Aero is that all cultures, religions can appreciate the role of the shepherd to help safeguard the flock. And so we feel that as our role in aviation is to help make sure that each one of our clients can move through the world safely and effectively.
Beautiful.
So just a little background on myself. I don't have as many hours as many of the folks in this room, but I've got a lot of varied international experience, and I cut my teeth traveling around the world in single-engine turboprops. So I had over 100 North Atlantic crossings and flew through Saudi Arabia many times in Piper Meridian and PC-12 in my early flying career. I started using the Gassim Airport in 2006 because I found it was just such an amazing avoidance of the handling fees and the congestion of Riyadh and Jeddah. And now it's amazing to go back to Gassim in 2020 and see all these commercial flights, and it's such a big developed airport. So let's talk about some of the things that make aviation really special for me. Is that aviation brings together people of all politics, religions, and cultures. When we're in the cockpit together, we're just aviators, and it's a really special thing to be able to transcend all the differences that people identify in their lives and to come together as pilots. It's magical.
That's very true, and there's no socioeconomical status when you're an aviator, right? It is a unified language. It is one language where you're an aviator. All you talk about is aerodynamics, it's flying airplanes, and it's the passion. And it's beautiful to see the amazing mixture even within Shepherd Aero and your incredible team as well.
Thanks. It's really special. I think every aviator is an environmentalist because you see the planet from the air and you can't help but care about it. And aviators have a special humility. We know that we will make mistakes in the future. Every flight involves at least one mistake. And that humility and self-introspection, I think, is just a really valuable part of all aviators. And the thing that I like most of all about aviation is its unlimited learning. There's no limit to the amount of continued knowledge we can gain and skills we can grow. So I really think aviation is just a beacon of hope and unity for all humanity.
That's very true. And I think all other pilots agree with that.
So last 5 weeks for me has been about the busiest travel period of my recent flying career. Over 60,000 miles flown, did 2 trips to the Middle East and an around the world westbound, around the world eastbound. And I thought some of this might be interesting to the rest of us aviation folks, or at least wear you out. So here was Phenom 300 from Boston to Boston to Dubai. I did this before Christmas as kind of a warm-up.
A warm-up.
A warm-up.
Boston.
And then here's the trip back from Indonesia. I did kind of towards the end of the trip as a warm down, and had a neat routing up through the stands, overflight of Afghanistan, and went to Uzbekistan for the first time. And I want to encourage you guys, if you haven't been to the stands, you got to go check them out. It's a different part of the world. Very interesting up there.
How long did this journey take you?
We had a few days in Germany doing business missions, but it was 2 days up to Germany, and then 1 day to Boston from Stansted at the end.
That was just a warm-up.
Just all warm-ups. Forward. This was the world record flight with Captain Joe that we used to come to the Sand and Fun event.
This took you 13 hours and 46 minutes, right?
That's correct.
Yes,
yep.
And you were 4 pilots in the plane, right?
And this was a planning challenge in addition to the pilot challenge. It was very, very interesting. Longest flight I've ever done as a pilot. But what I really want to talk about today is one portion of my last few weeks, which was I call the Ferry Pilot Ironman Challenge. And this is around the world flight, North Pacific, North Atlantic, and Europe to Asia in 3 different aircraft in less than 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And let's be clear, I defined the challenge after the mission presented itself. So I made the rules to fit the flight.
That's exactly what you said, right? About pilots knowing they would make mistakes in every single flight.
Exactly. So the first leg was Citation Mustang from Wichita to Kuwait.
Oh, wow.
Second one was the Phenom 300 from Sharjah to Indonesia. And the third piece was a different Phenom 300 from Singapore to Seattle. And now we're just going to show you some pictures and hopefully keep you awake. So the Citation Mustang is a single pilot, 6-seat jet aircraft. It's the slowest jet aircraft out there, but it's also the easiest to fly. And it's a great first jet aircraft. Around 3 million reals used and only 300 liters per hour of fuel burn. So it's a very accessible jet in the world of turbine aviation. So we attempted a world speed record from Wichita to Iceland. And there's some special challenges. Greenland airports are only open from 1100 to 1900 Zulu and closed on Sundays and holidays. So in order to do a world record flight through Greenland, you have to arrange the whole trip to match the hours. So we departed from Wichita in the evening around 7 p.m., flew through the night, 4 legs, about 12 hours, and established a new world speed record for the slowest jet.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So here's refueling in Detroit in the middle of the night. You get a lot of sunrises and sunsets on a ferry flight in the winter. So there's a sunrise approaching Greenland.
You cannot not be an environmentalist after you see such a scene. You can't. You become an environmentalist, all you think about is nature, because look at this.
And the privilege to see these things, that when you fly in a long-range aircraft, you never get to stop at these, you never have to stop at these little places far from anywhere else. So fascinating. So here's Greenland, minus 30 degrees Celsius on the ground.
Oh my God.
Minus 30. Very cold.
Oh my God. This must be summer for you then, right?
Yeah, I'm feeling comfortable. Very good here. The second day we went from Iceland, Belfast, Slovenia, and Greece. And a lot of the flight was at night, so it doesn't make a lot of good pictures, but we got a sunrise. And a beautiful view of the Swiss Alps coming through on the way down to Slovenia. And this is a picture on the ground in Ljubljana, Slovenia. And again, Ljubljana is one of those spots where you wouldn't just find yourself connecting on Lufthansa. You've got to be in a small aircraft. But if you get any chance to check out Dubrovnik, Slovenia, the whole area around the Adriatic Sea is beautiful.
It looks beautiful just from a picture. No wonder if you were there.
Yet another sunset. And so we overnighted in Heraklion, and the next day we go to Aqaba and Kuwait. And this was going to complete the ferry flight in the Mustang. And this was kind of a special day for me, because in addition to coming into the Africa and Middle Eastern area, we picked up some amazing tailwinds. Does this show? We had 140 knots on the tail, which I think is blocked in the picture up there. But in the next leg, if anyone who flies a Citation Mustang, raise your hand if you've seen 501 knots of ground speed.
Oh, wow.
You've done it. It's amazing. I had never seen it before. We were descending to accomplish that ground speed. Then I got the first time to Aqaba in Jordan, just a beautiful place. The physical surroundings there on the west end of Saudi Arabia, just amazing scenery. And Captain Taisir, who flies for His Royal Highness, used to be part of this Jordanian Flying Falcons. And so as I'm taxiing out, I looked over, and there's Taisir's old squadron out there getting ready. So it was kind of a special moment. And the area surrounding Aqaba and western Saudi Arabia, just beautiful.
So beautiful.
Really incredible. And here's the delivery into Kuwait. Unfortunately, it just looks like Kuwait can't fix that, but the delivery was finished. Next mission was to take this Phenom 300 from Sharjah, Dubai, to Semarang, Indonesia. So the best way to start with a jet, instead of going to school right away, is to go and actually fly that jet with a mentor and get some experience moving it around. It's really hard to learn all the emergency procedures and check ride preparation before you know the basics of operating the jet. So this owner decided when he bought his brand new Phenom 300, he'd go from Boston to Indonesia and back, visit one of his factories over a month to get some experience. So this was the second piece of this, was Dubai to Indonesia. So the Phenom 300 is really a step up from the Citation Mustang. It's 100 knots faster. It's got twice the range. It's capable of 45,000 feet with a full tank of gas. And it flies at Mach 7.7 and cruises around Mach 7.3, 7.4. So great aircraft. It sells for about 18 million reals used and burns 500 liters per hour. So it's definitely the leg up. But it's the fastest, longest range single pilot jet in aviation. And it's one of my real favorite planes to fly.
Wow. Do they have the winglets from Joe Clark's company, Aviation
No,
Partners?
They have, as Joe would call, joke winglets. So,
Even better.
So it's a neat plane, but it could use some improvement. So this is a sunrise in Sharjah. Again, you get a lot of sunrises doing this work.
Looks beautiful.
And, you know, it's really interesting. The Middle East is kind of this transition from the Western world of aviation, U.S. and Europe, to the Asian world of aviation. And, you know, U.S. and Europe flying is so easy. No permits are needed. There's a robust general aviation infrastructure, private flight airport areas, more like Tamama where you can access the airplane easily. But as you head east from the Emirates, things really can get challenging. Communication becomes more difficult. Controllers speak a very limited amount of aviation English. You need permits for each country you're going to overfly and land in. And there's really minimal general aviation infrastructure, so you end up being treated like an airline of one. So one of the challenges, like especially in Dubai, you cannot go to the aircraft as a pilot unless you're departing on a flight. If you want to go to the airplane the day before and fuel it, get the catering ready, clean the airplane, that's not possible because in the UAE, that's not the pilot's job. That's someone that an airport worker would do with an airport pass. So the whole challenges of access to the plane and moving around become much more difficult.
And it's so fascinating to see the difference in culture, even within aviation, right? If you're in the UAE, it's different. If you're in Saudi, it's different. If you're in the US, it's different as well.
Yeah, much different. And I really want to encourage the Saudi Aviation Club and GACA to keep thinking about treating general aviation as its own special part of aviation, right? It really needs to be treated differently than airlines because it's not the same world.
That's very true.
So Subang in Kuala Lumpur is really an exception in that region for a wonderful GA airport. So we chose that for an overnight. This airplane had a long-range radio, so we got to fly from India directly over the Bay of Bengal down to Kuala Lumpur. And Kuala Lumpur is so aviation friendly, they even have a ramp dog.
Oh my God.
This dog greets you on every landing and departure. So we were in Kuala Lumpur for New Year's Eve, and as I'm in the taxi, you know, Malaysia is a Muslim country, so I asked the taxi driver, I said, so, how is New Year's Eve in Kuala Lumpur? And he said, a lot of alcohol. Okay, so not for us. We're ferry pilots. We went to the hotel, got some sleep, and head out the next day, but KL was a very exciting New Year's Eve. Now, fatigue management is one of the big challenges on a ferry flight. So even though, while I may consume alcohol from time to time in the U.S., I usually don't on these ferry flights because you can't manage the fatigue in addition to any other impact. So we finished part 2 of the Ferry Pilot Challenge, and this Phenom 300 would stay in Indonesia until January 10th until we would bring it back to Boston through Europe. So here's arrival into Indonesia. My student had done all this flying in the U.S., and in the U.S., things like a VOR approach, full procedure, are not done very often except in training. So as we came into this airport, the published approach was a VOR approach with circle to land minimums, and my client says, hey, no way we're going to do this. We'll just get radar vector to the ILS, right? There's no ILS here. We sat in the hold until the last aircraft landed, and then we went out and did this exact same full procedure. So those kind of funny aviation things that you don't think you're going to use in the very developed part of the world, you still need to have those skills for flying in the rest of the world. So here's delivery in Indonesia, and here's a winglet that doesn't meet the aviation partner standard.
Are you happy with this, Joe? Is that okay?
A pretendlet, exactly. So then the last part was really the culmination of this whole exercise. The first 2 parts of this trip were flown with a student along with me who was learning to fly the aircraft. And so this last section was going to be a single pilot mission. And while I like to bring friends along on these flights or people who have interest, the very short notice for this trip, it restricted chances to invite any pilot friends on the mission. So we were going to attempt 2 world records on this flight, Singapore to Tokyo and Singapore to Seattle.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, at this part on the trip, I was running low on crew snacks in my catering bag. So I went to the shopping mall across the street from my hotel in Singapore, and I found a grocery store. Don Don Donkey. It turned out it was a Japanese convenience store or grocery store, and I really struggled to find good food. The Kit Kats were peach pie flavored Kit Kats.
Oh my God.
Never seen those before.
I have heartburn already.
Well, wait till the next slide. This one was the spicy dried squid legs. With special impact, the more you chew, the more the flavor comes out. Let's just say I was a little hungry on this last flight to Seattle. So the flight from Singapore to Tokyo, we took advantage of special international rules. So each country owns 12 miles offshore from their own land. But the area more than 12 miles offshore is considered the high seas. And no flight permits or restrictions can be accepted in the high seas. Every plane has the freedom of navigation to travel the high seas, just like a boat does. So we had HF radio in this aircraft, and so we took some deep offshore routes to avoid Chinese airspace, avoid any permits required for this whole leg except for the landing in Philippines. This was kind of a special advantage of this aircraft. Unfortunately, the Phenom 300 has not the same radio as the Gulfstream, so we had some communications issues. And one of the things you can do anytime you can't reach the air traffic control is you can listen for airliners flying above you or below you in this case and use them for relays. So we used a lot of airline relays on the flight up to Philippines. Got some quick gas in Lawag, a couple thousand liters of jet fuel, and then it was on up to Tokyo. And this area around Tokyo is known for extremely strong jet stream. In fact, last year with Joe, we saw 662 knots on a flight from Macau to Seattle. But this was a different day. So as I'm coming into Tokyo, you can see up in the top this 160 knot winds. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if I should ask Tokyo for a vector off course to get some better ground speed. Nah, I'm on a world record flight. Let's just keep the mission going. Tokyo, they only speak exactly 300 words of aviation English, so any kind of conversational request can be challenging. But right as I'm going through this whole thought process, the controller says, turn right 30 degrees for radar separation. Perfect. So, as every pilot does when he thinks he's going to set a new personal speed record in an airplane, I start taking pictures. Oh, is it cropped? So I take the first picture, 600 knots. And I take another picture, 601 knots. I'm bummed these photos. Can we squeeze down the size of the pictures just a little bit?
They're on top, right?
Yeah, the ground speed numbers are at the top. Kind of losing the suspense of all this, but 601 knots, 602 knots, or 4 knots, 605 knots.
Oh, wow.
So the trip with Captain Joe, I've got maybe 80 pictures between 605 and 662 knots. As you keep, every time it goes a knot faster, you take another picture. So these are the small victories. So this was the first time I'd ever seen 600 knots in a Phenom 300. But then it was back on course, on the ground in Tokyo, late night arrival. And now it's time for the last day of the Ferry Pilot Ironman Challenge. Due to the time zone issues, we had to finish this trip the way we started it, which is flying through the night. It's 14 hours roughly from Tokyo to Seattle, but you lose 7 hours of time zone, which means it's 21 hours on the clock to make this trip. So, off we go. So we started with the de-ice in Tokyo. We try always to avoid de-ice. It's quite expensive. So we got a beautiful morning sunrise there. And oh, there's glare ice on the aircraft. So here comes the de-ice truck. And the departure from Tokyo is an RNAV departure, but as I'm flying this departure, I realize it's just one big circle over the airport to about 14,000 feet. So I came back over the airport and got to take a little picture before I headed on course. That's Narita. And it's unusual. You know, most places in the world, we don't use the busiest airport in the country for general aviation. It's not the first idea. But Tokyo has such limited general aviation. Narita is one of the only places in the whole country that actually has a general aviation ramp and infrastructure.
Wow.
So it's kind of unusual.
That's very interesting.
$4,000 handling too, so only go if you have to. So here's the trip up to Petro in Russia. And the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia is another place that most humans will never see or go to unless they're on a ferry flight. It's deep offshore in Siberia, but it's got 7 active volcanoes. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is really an incredible place. It's a place that sometime in my life, I'm going to go and spend a few days and travel around and see. So most know it only as a fuel stop, and most people try not to spend the night in Petro. So as you come into Petro, here's the instrument approach, and the terrain awareness in the modern aircraft is a great thing because when you're in the clouds, it helps you avoid rocks. And if you look at this instrument procedure, it involved a lot of terrain. And I'd always been to Petro in the middle of the night before, but today was a daytime flight, so as I come down out of the clouds, I see this just amazing shot of this volcano.
This is beautiful.
It's like about 4,000 meter.
Oh, wow.
Incredible. That is the most beautiful part of Petro, unfortunately. So now it's time to taxi into the Soviet Siberian terminal. And, you know, a lot of extreme weather conditions. We had minus 30 temps in Greenland, and we had minus 20 C temps on this flight. And I don't do a lot of selfies, but here's a picture of me in Petro, so you can see the amount of winter garb we have to wear to kind of survive the fueling. So now I'm on the last leg, or the second to last leg down to Anchorage. And one thing that's unique about this picture is if you look off to the left, there's Greenland and Iceland. Right? So it's kind of a funny perspective. You're looking ahead to Alaska, but Iceland's just there. And on the next leg to Bellingham, there's Seattle. It was the same story. I'm headed to Seattle, but it looked like if I just went a little bit left, I could be in Greenland or Iceland.
Yes.
Near the top of the world. So here's the end of the trip at Joe's former FBO, and where Brad's still working, modern aviation, about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And got one nice picture of the aircraft. But the pilot's work is not done when you get the aircraft on stand. So I departed Tokyo about 2200 Zulu, 7 a.m., landed Seattle about 1200 Zulu, about 4 a.m., but then I had to fuel the aircraft, service the engines with oil to leave it ready for the next flight. Drove over to the control tower, picked up the world record landing form, and then drove home and met my wife for breakfast.
Aw, what a beautiful story.
So here's the bottom line. It only takes about 9 days to circumnavigate the world in a light aircraft, right? You guys can do this. The Citation Mustangs that are right here at the Saudi Aviation Club, these aircraft can circumnavigate the Earth. The Earth is not that big, so I just want to encourage you, please.
You make it sound so easy, Travis. You make it sound so easy, and you've inspired us all to just go and set world-setting records, traveling the world. Thank you so much for this inspiration, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I just want to open the room for 1 or 2 questions at most.
I started flying in 1997, which is probably about the year a lot of these folks in this room had 5,000 to 10,000 hours. So I'm a junior aviator in the group.
Was it in Bellingham where you learned to fly?
It was in Bellingham. Someone took me for a ride in a Cessna 182, and I'm not sure what drug addiction's like, but I'm imagining it's about like the feeling that I encountered when I had that first flight.
I think we all had that same feeling at one time.
It does. It does. Thank you so much, Travis. Oh, sorry, we have one more question. Over there.
Travis, you and I started learning to fly about the same time. I've got about 2 years on you. When you started as a student pilot, did you ever dream that you'd be doing this kind of flying?
Absolutely not. I thought, if I could just one day take a Cessna 182 to Las Vegas, that was going to be the pinnacle of my flying career.
So obviously the point is, as you said, you can do it.
Yeah, and there's no limits to what you can do in aviation if you just put your mind to it and start flying and stay around airplanes.
And that's so inspiring. Thank you so much again. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Travis, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your amazing inspiration. I feel like all of us just want to go and set world records right now, right? We have an incredible pilot, an incredible aviator, Mr. Ken Hoffman, a person with more than 60 years in aviation experience. He got his first CFI job in 1962, correct? And you have more than 19,000 hours, I believe? Yes. Or could it be 20,000 by now? And I love the thought. Thank you so much for being with us. And I can't wait to hear your story. Of course, Captain Ken Hoffman, in 2013, received the Wright Brothers Award, right? And in 2017, he has also received the NAFI Lifetime Achievement Award. We are honored to have you here. And
you read my resume.
I studied you. And that's my job because you're such an inspiration to the aviation industry as well. With more than 60 years in aviation experience. I just want to start off with one of your stories, and if you could just tell us what were one of the most memorable experiences in those 60 years?
Oh boy, that's hard.
That's a lot, right?
There's been so many. It really has been an incredible experience. And you mentioned the 60 years. The Wright brothers flew in 1903 as the first powered flight. And I have, in my career, flown more than 51% of that period between the beginning of flight.
That's a beautiful perspective to look at.
Yes, it is. And, but I've had so many great experiences. And if you like, I could start out about how I got started.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And how did you fall in love with aviation as well?
Well, I kind of grew up with it. I grew up in Danville, Illinois, and we had a truck farm out in the country, and we were across the street in a field from the local airport. And I had 2 older brothers, one 9 and the other 10 years older than myself. And we spent a lot of time going to the airport. And through that corn patch to get to the airport, we had such a deep trail that even when they cultivated, you could still see where our path was. And so spent a lot of time doing that. So I was introduced early, and both my brothers soloed before they had their driver's license.
Oh, wow.
And my older brother, Ron, was my protector, my mentor. He always took good care of me. And I won't say what the other brother was like, but Ron was my protector. And he had his airframe technician certificate before he graduated from high school.
Oh, wow.
but unfortunately, he was killed in a tragic crash. And so my parents made the airport off limits to me. You know, I wasn't to have anything to do with that crowd over there at the airport. So then later on, after high school, I was told by everybody that I would be going to college. So I went to University of Denver, School of Business Administration, with a specialty in business, building industry, and real estate. So, but it was about the end of the second year when I was called in by the counselor, and he said, Ken, you're not doing so well. And I said, yeah, I know. And he says, well, how did you pick this school? And I said, well, we drove through Colorado one time, and I thought that Colorado was nice, and I have a friend that got a track scholarship here, and he said it's good schools. Okay. He says, how did you pick this major? And I said, well, it sounded better than liberal arts. And he said, okay. And he says, well, do you have family in the business? I said, no. Do you have a job lined up for when you graduate? I said, no. He said, oh. He says, tell me, is there anything you've ever really wanted to do? I thought about it, and I said, well, yeah, the only thing I've ever really wanted to do was fly. And he says, well, why don't you? And I said, well, my folks don't want me to. He says, is that a good enough excuse? And I thought, lightning is going to strike this guy, you know.
Like
and
a
I
true
thought
rebel.
about it, and wow, I can really choose, you know.
It's not just my parents.
So I dropped out of school and went to the airport and started taking lessons.
Oh,
and lived
wow.
happily ever after. You know?
Oh, wow. How many years did you have in college by then, studying business?
Not quite two. Not quite two.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like a true rebel that came up for a huger call, right? To go
Yep.
into aviation.
That's right.
So how did you convince your parents?
I didn't.
I just did it.
I did it, yes.
That's
and
beautiful.
my mom was sure that I wouldn't have survived training, you know, and Dad said she would cry herself to sleep at night, and now I've outlived everybody else in the family. You know,
MashaAllah,
so-
tabarakallah.
so,
God bless. God bless. So when you first did that huge pivot from studying business, less than 2 years, you wanted to risk everything to just go into aviation.
That's right.
What were the top challenges and the top solutions or the drive that kept you going to reach where you are today?
Well, I knew I wanted to fly for a career. And in those days, there were a lot of pilots available for the airlines. It was, if you got hired by the airlines, you would start out as a flight engineer, and that might last 10 years. And then you would get into the co-pilot seat or the first officer seat, and that might take another 10 years. So it could be a long time for you wherever in the left seat. And I had an instructor that was particularly inspiring for me. And in Denver, there's a United Training Center where all their pilots go for training. And this instructor worked for United, but he also did some freelancing. And so I'd had a number of instructors prior to that, but I needed some specialized training for instrument flying. So when I met with him, as I was accustomed to doing, I would get the keys and I say, okay, let's go. And he says, wait a minute. So what's wrong? He says, we need to brief. Oh, really? You know? Oh, that's nice. You know, so we sat down and we went flying, and every time he touched the airplane, it was just music, you know. It was so smooth, and he was such a easy fellow to communicate with. So we get back, and I said, okay, when can we fly again? And he says, wait a minute. I said, what's wrong? He says, we need to debrief. I said, oh, that's nice.
It escaped
Yeah.
your mind completely?
Yeah, well, I'd never had that experience with an instructor before. You just get out and go, you know. And so then So then he says, now let's talk about what we're going to do next time, what I want you to brief, and so on like that. And so he became a model for me, someone that I really wanted to emulate. And one day after flying, we went to the coffee shop at the Sky Chef restaurant there at the airport. And he says, well, Kenny, he says, when you get your qualifications, are you going to apply for the airlines? And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I've always associated myself with general aviation, and I think I'd like to become a flight instructor. And he says, oh, that's great. He says, Kenny, he says, when we take a new class at United Airlines, in just a few days, we can pick out everybody in the class that had experience as a flight instructor. They're more knowledgeable about the basics and so on. And he says, and then when we start flying with them, he says, they are much better pilots. And he says, in other words, Kenny, if you get 2,000 hours teaching pilots how to fly straight and level, you'll get so you can do it yourself. And so that was further inspiration for me to become a flight instructor. And so that's kind of how I got started.
And that was my third question. I mean, with your experience, with your knowledge, a lot of people choose the commercial journey, right? But
yes.
you chose to teach pilots. You chose to make the future pilots as well.
That's right.
What, it shows that you're outspoken. It shows that you're an incredible speaker when you want to share a story. Mm-hmm. But I want you to share with us a story from all of the students and all of the pilots you've trained. Mm-hmm. What is the one story that sticks out?
Well, that's a good one. In pilot training, flight instructors will often become flight instructors so they can build time to meet qualifications for the airline or other types of flying. And others, like myself, sought to do it as a career. I think what stands out in my experience is the joy of teaching someone to fly, to share the skills that I had learned. And every time you teach a primary student to the point where they can fly solo and make that solo flight, you know, it really is a touching experience, and it makes you feel good. Flying is part knowledge. You need academic type knowledge, and to become a pilot, of course, you have to pass knowledge tests. In the flying part, that is truly a skill. You can read all you want to about flying, but actually learning the skills to fly takes practice, and the instructors are always challenged to direct that practice to good benefit, to always set a good example and not do things that would create false impression of what should or should not be done. And then as you advance into other training, moving all the way up to example for flying Learjets, teaching in Learjets, one of my greatest thrills is to take a pilot who for the first time is flying a jet, put him in the left seat, and watch as he applies that thrust and it goes racing down the runway, and instead of climbing at 200, 300, 400 feet per minute, it's climbing at like 7,000 feet per minute, you know.
Oh, wow.
And to see them light up, you know, that is something I've never gotten tired of. And seeing pilots able to put their airplanes to use as a career, or just someone who's going to be flying for pleasure. one of the things that's very important in flying is that a pilot stays in the training loop. And we have a higher accident rate in private flying than we do other phases of flying. For example, corporate flying, like Prince Sultan and like Joe Clark, always involved in the training process by doing regular training, annual proficiency checks. But sometimes pilots will learn to fly, get their private certificate, and they tend to get away from the training cycle, and their skills begin to diminish. And we always encourage pilots, once they get their private pilot certificate, not only stay current, but go ahead and advance to other pilot qualifications and get an instrument rating and get a multi-engine rating. And then as you go on, it's learning about other airplanes and getting qualified in higher performance airplanes and that type of thing.
And you have 8 type ratings, right?
9.
9,
Yeah.
yeah. That's incredible. I want to ask you, because you mentioned the first solo of one of your student pilots, right?
Yes.
And I remember my first solo. I felt like I owned the world. When I landed that plane, I felt like I owned the world.
Yeah.
So I want to ask
That's
you,
right.
if you can go back to your first solo, Captain Ken. Did you know that you were going to dedicate your entire life to the world of aviation and of teaching students as well?
Well, I got a late start. You know, I didn't. I tried the college part first, you know, and before I really knew that I had to do that. And I think I felt like I was going all the way. And I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I was determined to do it. I qualified, after my first solo, qualified for private and commercial and multi-engine, all within about 5 months. I'd done a lot of prep, passing tests, written tests, knowledge tests before I actually started flying.
How many hours did you used to train every day?
It did in the private, it was right around 50 hours, I guess, and at that time, the commercial was 200 hours, and then multi-engine isn't that many hours, but it is one of the really fun things that you do in the process.
It took you 5 months to get all the 3. MashaAllah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Last question prior to opening the Q&A. What's your favorite plane to fly today and why?
Well, I agree with Joe. The plane that I'm flying at the particular time is my favorite. There are very few airplanes that I've come across that I really don't like, and I like flying all kinds. I've said, like living in Colorado, I would rather get in a Piper Cub and fly up in the mountains than to fly in the Gulf Stream to Chicago, you know. And
spoken like a true aviator. Ken, I cannot get enough of asking you questions, but I feel like I'm being a bit selfish, and I want to open the room for Q&A. Anyone has any question for Captain Ken? Captain Joe? If we can hand the mic over here, please.
I could give you some of the story of my relationship with Prince Sultan.
Oh, for sure. I think Captain Joe wants to, but Prince Sultan says no, no, no. What are you hiding, Prince Sultan?
This is the reason why I came. I really wanted to tell people the truth, you know.
Captain Joe, you have a question?
What I wanted to ask you, with your flying career for so many years, talk about a couple of the different emergencies you've had and how you've handled them.
Well, haven't had that many. I've only had one honest-to-goodness engine failure, and from engine malfunction, and that was when Prince Sultan and I were flying out of Mexico. Cozumel, and we were flying a Lear 35, and the early experience with that engine on the 35, had some problems, and we had one of them. And the engine came, the engine failed going through about 16,000 feet.
Oh my God.
And so we shut it down, and we have the capability on the Lear 35 to jettison the tip tanks, the fuel in the tip tanks to lighten the load. And so we jettisoned the fuel and returned to land. And it was very routine thing, something that we practice all the time in training to fly on one engine. Sultan did a very good job of it. And the airport commandante came out and said, "Why did you come back?" And said, "Well, we had an engine failure." "Why didn't you call an emergency?" And I said, "It's because it was no emergency, you know."
We handled it.
I didn't want fire trucks chasing us and running into us, you know, or whatever, you know. It was really quite routine.
Any other questions? Prince Sultan, if we can have the mic here, please.
Well, I wanted to say thank you very much. Ken, I think, you know, everybody in aviation, if lucky, would have a chance to fly. For me, it's a lifetime, since 1979. But to fly with a master, not just an instructor, but a very thoughtful, thorough person that will also let you do a lot of mistakes. And I did a lot of mistakes. Because you can't just come to a flight school, find a junior instructor, and tells you how to turn the buttons and how to turn left and right. You have to fly and find yourself a master who will really take you to the next level. So Ken talked about an emergency. I think we had a few more. Landing an airplane without engines, both engines, a jet.
Oh, wow.
Engines out. But we'll keep that just between us.
You can't tease us like this.
On the ice. But, you know, you go through these life experiences. And so I started 76 flying, like I said yesterday, with a very good guy named Jack Metter, who's also a senior instructor. And then when I really wanted to fly faster and do more things, he transitioned me to Ken. So I could say Ken taught me how to fly better. Right, Ken?
Right.
No, you should say something different.
Not yet.
So I could say Ken taught me how to fly.
Not yet.
You're very humble. Not yet.
Every time I introduce Ken to people,
Yeah.
he would whisper to them and say, "Not yet." and I believe him. It is really not yet. Every single flight, Joe and I and Ken agree that the plane, I just flew in a Cessna 182, and I absolutely loved it. I bumped it twice on the runway, but, you know, so it's really an experience flying with someone like Ken, because the flying we did was really complex and quality flying. We flew Learjets everywhere. Clay Lacy, the icon of aviation. Joe spoke about him yesterday. I knew Clay Lacy 30 years ago, more than that. So I'd say to Ken, let's find us a Learjet and go flying. Sometimes to Mexico, sometimes to South America, sometimes everywhere. Just spare the moment, because we wanted to fly. And
now he's saying all these nice things. His objective is to keep me from telling the rest of the story.
But you know, as aviators, a lot of the times when I rented the Learjet, I didn't have the money to pay for it. And so we'd call Clay Lacy, maybe Joe doesn't know that, and they would leave the keys to the Learjet on the desk and the flight operation they had with nobody in there. So we'd come in, pick up the keys, Ken would sign something, and the bill would come in a month or 2 months later, and I'd pay them maybe another 3 months later. And we'd fly everywhere. So 3 things. I really learned how to fly the way I fly today, Gulfstreams and BBJs and stuff, and the blue Learjet you see on the tarmac, from Ken. Remember the 25, the Lear 25? I used to do car racing quite a bit. So one time we landed it, engine out by purpose, and then we had a hard landing and all that. But really, and I say to pilots, if you can fly a Learjet, like the one I have here, the manual Learjet, no electronics, nothing, you can fly a monkey with wings. So try to challenge yourself, diversify your flying, and I totally agree with Ken. like Joe and I and other people, we work hard on training. We take it very seriously. We take our health very seriously. This is for the young pilots. And I want to just today now to welcome a great team from Lebanon who are there. I didn't want to break up the hangar talk, but we will come to see them. And Lebanon is a great country. Just for them to know, and I'm going to come and greet them in a minute, that the very first flight I took in my life when I was 3 years old was to Lebanon.
Oh, wow.
The first visa in my passport was to Lebanon.
All right.
And the first lady that came to help me and my brother, Fahad, my late brother, when we were small kids, was called Saad from Lebanon, from Trablus.
Yes.
And Lebanon, to me, is not just a country, it's a life experience. It's a beautiful country. And of course, the Lebanese have this very high-end taste and talent, you know. So look at them, how they're dressed, as opposed to the rest of us. So thank you for coming. الله يحيي. والبارح تعشينا مطعم لبناني كيف ما جيتوا.
Thank you again for coming.
So just to say, you know, I could sit there and talk forever about my experience with Ken. It really has been an absolutely life joy to have this guy as a friend and as a mentor.
Thank you.
And as a rescuer. And, you know, he's with me now. We're restoring airplanes. We won the biggest award in Oshkosh for our twin Bonanza for restoration.
Wow.
And we're doing a couple of projects today. And I told Ken, three things came to his life when he retired, more or less. All the things we do. He remarried his old sweetheart, a great lady whom I love to, you know, very much. So she kept him on the straight and narrow. And he went back to Florida, to live in Florida, as opposed to living in Wisconsin or somewhere where there's ice all the time. So he went back to sailing. And I told him yesterday, I said, I keep you in flying, shuttling planes and restoration. If I stop, Ken will die the next day. So I'm just reiterating the words with Joe Grant, a great guy. He's the man who brought the DC-3 for King Abdulaziz as a present from President Roosevelt in 1945. We restored it fully, and I flew it in the 100th anniversary of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow.
And I became friends of Joe Grant, I'm sorry. I'm also a good friend of Joe Clark here. Joe Grant and Jessica and Joe Grant and I went to Oshkosh in 2009 and celebrated Joe Grant's, he died at 102.
MashaAllah.
And I have a video which I'm going to put up on the website today. I hope Ray gets it. Where he was sitting in the plane and doing a video for him talking to me and the DC-3 on all the noise, so we had to transcribe it. And his word to me were, don't let them stop flying, tell them not to let you stop flying. He said, if you stop flying, you die the next day. And he called me 2 days before he passed away, and he said, I think I'm passing this week or whatever, but he said, remember my words, don't stop flying. So you become an aviator when you just don't want to stop flying.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you for your
Thank
comment,
you.
Sultan, and thank you so much,
I
Captain.
did, to further answer Joe's question.
More dirt. Ziad, more dirt.
Give us the details.
We can do this behind the scenes if you want.
Well,
What do you say, Captain?
reference the Greenland landing? Or is that what you're saying? Okay.
Remember, I was a junior pilot, and the three of you guys were senior pilots.
Yeah. That's one of the
I
problems.
wonder, do you have a picture?
We had four
Ray,
pilots on board.
Leo, do you have a picture of the plane on the ice?
Okay. We had a mission to fly from Denver, Colorado, to the Paris Air Show in 1981. That was June of 1981. And we flew nonstop from Goose Bay, Labrador, into Reykjavik, and then on into to Prestwick, Scotland, and then on into to Paris for the Paris Air Show. And then we did some flying around Europe and so on. And we're on our way back. And Sultana and I flew the first leg. We stopped in Edinburgh, and we were departing out of Edinburgh, and he and I flew the first leg, and then we were rotating. We were going to, between the four of us, rotate legs until we got back to Denver rather than stopping overnight. And we were on the leg from Reykjavik, Iceland, into Nassauiswak, Greenland. And on that leg, we didn't have the navigation equipment that would allow us to fly above 28,000. So we were flying at 28,000, and which burns more fuel. And we had enough fuel to go into Nassauiswak with a Sonderstrom alternate. If we could make that decision to go to alternate before we descended out of altitude. So as we got over there, I made a couple passes to the cockpit, and Gary was in the right seat. And how are we doing? We had one ADF that we were trying to pick up Simutac. And Simutac, you make the descent out over the water, and then you fly the 46 miles up the fjord to Nassauiswak. So he said, well, we got a signal kind of. We don't get any identifier. It's kind of weak. And so I checked from time to time, and finally I said, don't descend until we know where we are. Well, then the needle started to swing, and they said, okay, here we go. And so then we found out that it's a bad signal. Well, here we are. We've gone down. Getting back up to go to Sonderstrom would be a challenge. So we were committed at that time to go into Nassauiswak. And when we had enough break in the clouds, what we saw below did not calculate with what we should see with the two fjords that led up towards Nassauiswak. So we were urgently trying to fix our position, and called Nassauiswak radio and asked them, told them we were visual on the west coast but unsure of our location. And I said, he says, well, what kind of assistance would you like? And I said, do you have VHF DF, which is a way that we can key the mic and they can tell where the signal's coming from. He says, do we have what? And they didn't have radar. They didn't have VHF DF, so not much of a way to help us. And so we're still trying to get oriented. And then Greenland Air called in. They were flying a Dash 8, de Havilland Dash 8 on an airline, one of the airlines there. And they said, have you tried 700 kilohertz, which is a regular commercial frequency? And I said, I'll try it. So we dialed in 700 kilohertz, and we got a very strong signal. And I said, where is that? And he says, same as Simutac. So we started tracking toward that. We're looking, and then we look up. We're going over land again, and then I could see way down to the south of us where the two fjords were. So then we could tell where Nassauiswak was, and we started going there. And Gary has got the calculator, and he says, well, looks like we've got about 20 minutes worth of fuel left. And I said, if we've got 10 minutes, we'll be on the ground. And about that time, one of the engines flamed out. So I opened the cross flow and turned on the relight, and the engine spooled right back up. So I knew it was the fuel. We're better off on one engine in that configuration, that speed, than with two. So I shut the cross flow, let that engine quit. And I told him, I said, I think we've got the end of the fjord spotted where Nassauiswak is, and but there's a mountain with a north-south fault in it, and it looks like that should be straight out on final approach. And they said, if there's any doubt about making a runway, suggest you land on the ice cap. And I said, okay. And in the meantime, Sultan had let the altitude creep up. We were up around 23,000, I believe. And and then the left engine flamed out. And it is possible that we could have made the airport from that position.
Oh my God.
However, if you land short, you're in the fjord where there's chunks of ice floating in the water. And if you go long, well, then there's a big cliff on down from the end of the runway, or rapidly rising terrain. So I said, okay, let's put it on the ice cap. And so and the Greenland air pilot said to suggest you go inland as far as possible to get the best conditions and land gear up. And of course, heard of that happening before, and successful landings up there. So by this time, well, before that, Gary had gotten out of the right seat, and I'm a right seat, Sultan's in the left. And so we started gliding, and then I could see the fall line was more at a bearing of 30 degrees, so we turned to that. And we tried flaps 1, that felt good. Flaps 2 still felt good. More flaps, not so good because too much drag. So we went to flaps 2, and we're gliding at about 170 knots. And it seemed like it was taking forever. And Sultan says, well, we know where we're going to land and how we're going to do it. Why don't I just pull the spoilers and we get her down and get it over with? And I said, no, let's not throw away any time. We may need it. And so then I said, okay, now what we need to do is keep the airspeed up, and that gives us kinetic energy. When we come down close to the snow, then to the surface, well, then we rotate, stay just above, and let it land at minimum speed. And he says, okay. He says, do you want to land it? And I said, no, you're doing fine. You land it, and I'll follow through with you. Why don't you land it, and I'll follow through with you? So we made a very nice landing, and let's see, that picture was up there.
Can we please put the picture back up?
I thought I saw the picture up there.
Yeah, it was up. They'll put it back up.
Yeah, okay. So we landed, I think we probably skidded in the snow about 1,000 feet. We touched down, there's slight undulations in the snow, and we touched down, and it came down, and then came to a nice stop.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing story.
We had put quite a bit of catering on board, and knowing that we were going to make an off-airport landing, Gary had put all the catering back into the potty in the back of the airplane. Well, our deceleration was rapid enough, the door came open, and the catering, which included yogurt and fish, spilled out onto the floor, and we could smell the yogurt. And Prince Sultan says, all right, who got sick? You know? So
that's an incredible story.
I told the passengers, I said, let's stay right here. We got a nice place to stay. Not worried about fire. We don't have any fuel left on board. And and we had advised Nassauwak that we were going to land on the ice cap, of course. And then we had a floatable ELT, a large emergency locator transmitter. And I told Gary to put it out on the wing. So he opened up the emergency exit over the wing and stepped out there, and he says, hey, it's nice out here. So then everybody wanted out on the wing. And about, I think it's about 40 minutes later, helicopter came in from Nassauwak. It was Greenland Air, and it's a Sikorsky S-62, a nice big twin-engine helicopter. And so we got on board that, and as we were about to lift off, the captain turned around and he said, look, and there's a U.S. Air Force C-130 making a low pass over our location. And they had responded to the call, and of course they had stuff that they could drop to us and drop paramedics and so on like that. But so then that night there was a big celebration there in the little village of Narsarsuaq, and we had the helicopter pilot and we had the Green and Air pilot, and the 6 of us. We had 2 other passengers on board. 6 of us were very happy. And as we sat there, Sultan says, "What an incredible experience that was." He says, "When we get back, get another Hawker and let's do this again."
That's an incredible
So
story.
that same Sikorsky, we later contracted through the insurance company to remove the wings and remove the engines. The Sikorsky flew the pieces into Narsarsuaq. They put the airplane back together, and Gary and I picked it up and brought it back to Denver.
That's an incredible story. What a beautiful story. You truly are a master, Captain Ken.
I have one other, what I call a crash. And we had a client, Jack Rickard, and he had a wife, Jill, Jack and Jill. And he had a hangar full of airplanes. And his wife was a very nervous flyer. And one time we were taking the Lear 24D that he had from Denver to Long Beach, and she showed up very, very nervous about the flight, and I had experienced her aversion to flying before, so I always tried to be calm for her and tried to say something to comfort her. And so anyway, we flew down to Long Beach, California. And when we got out, she was happy and everything, you know. And I said, "Jill," I said, "did you really enjoy the flight?" She says, "It wasn't that bad after I finished that bottle of wine." So then Jack said, "Well, what you need to do is to take some flying lessons to overcome this fear." And I've always taught that fear, F-E-A-R, means false evidence appearing real. And so sometimes when you learn more about something, well, then the fear begins to go away. So Jack had a Husky, which is a conventional geared airplane, the tail wheel, and it's a challenge. And I would have selected a easier airplane to fly for her. But he said, "No, real pilots fly tail-wheel airplanes, you know." So
Amen to that.
she was taking lessons from a friend of mine, Drew Chaitia, and was taking a lot of training, and she was really having a lot of difficulty. And one time, Drew said, "Okay, today's the day, Centennial Airport, we're going to do this." And so he briefed her, told the tower what was going on and so on like that. So she taxied out and applied the power to take off, and the tail popped up rather quickly because he wasn't sitting back there, and it scared her. So she closed the throttle and wouldn't go up again, and so that shook her up a bit. Well, then was at a cocktail party with Jack and Jill and a bunch of other people. And she was telling about her misfortunes and not being able to get soloed. And I told her, I said, "Well, Jill, Drew is an excellent instructor. Happened to be a serious victim of birth defects, but crippling his hands and his feet, and had a crippled walk. But he was an excellent instructor." And I said, "Now, Drew is an excellent instructor, but," I said, "if sometime you'd like for me to fly with you, I'd be happy to do that. And sometimes just a different approach or something like that makes a difference." She says, No, that's all right." A few days later, I was at the hangar. She was there, and she says, Ken, I think I would like for you to go fly with me. And I said, okay. And I thought, oh, she's been checking me out, I wonder, well, this is good, I'm kind of puffing up, and she says, yeah, she says, I'd like to see what it's like to fly with that much weight in the back. That's the most serious crash I've ever had.
Oh my God, Ken, we could spend hours over here just hearing your amazing stories.
Big mistake to hand me a mic.
That's what Prince Sultan said yesterday as well. But you truly are a master. You truly are a legend, and we truly want to thank you again for being a part of Hangar Talk Saudi Arabia. Thank you again. Oh my God, the next session is a session that I have been looking forward to all my life. John and Martha King, I have spent tens and tens of hours learning from you, looking at you. I feel like you're my friends, you're my family, you're legends, and we are honored to have you here today. And please make your way to the stage so you could inspire the entire crowd as well. If we could please upload the presentation for the Kings. Thank you for being with us. And I feel like you're my family, honestly. I've spent more hours with you than I've spent with my mom in the past few months. Thank you for being with us.
Condolences to you.
Thank you for being with us. If we could please have another microphone as well. Down to the stage. Of course, I feel like everyone in this room already knows you, but just, here you go. Yes, if you want to sit here as well.
You are so good.
Well, thank you so much. I have learned from you.
What a pro you are. We can do this as an interview if you prefer.
Yeah, for sure. Whatever you guys prefer, we are just honored to have you here. Of course, the Kings have more than 40 years in aviation experience. They are pioneers within education and aviation as well. You are one of the first pioneers that ever used technology with fun aviation techniques. And I am one of the pilots that have learned from you first-handedly. And I'm sure there are millions and millions more that have also learned from you and that cherish you as well as pioneers in this industry. The first question I want to ask is, how did it start? How did it start?
Well, we went bankrupt in another business.
That's how all the best things start, right?
And probably one of the reasons we went bankrupt, we were spending all our money flying. And so we said, well, let's do something for the fun of it. And what we decided would be fun would be teaching pilots ground schools. And we'll do that until a serious business comes along. And it's been about 45 years. We've never found a serious business, so we're still teaching ground schools. So it was just I think there's a lot of experience here in this room talking to people. If you do what you love, you're probably going to do a better job of it, and your life will be better than if you don't.
That's very true.
And that was our philosophy.
And, John's father owned an airplane, and John flew with his father in the plane and got hooked on flying very, very early, probably as early as you can remember.
Well, I soloed in 1960.
Oh, wow.
So that makes you sound old.
Well, they had just invented airplanes.
And my father was in the Air Force, but that was in the days before they had any women flying in the U.S. military. And it just didn't conceive of the idea that either of his daughters might be interested in flying. And I wasn't until I met John. And as we were dating, he kept introducing me to general aviation. He didn't have his pilot certificate yet, but we would be flying around with a friend of his who had was it a tri-pacer then that he came?
It was a regular pacer, a conventional pacer, not a tri-pacer.
Right, with a tail wheel, and that's right, a regular pacer. And John's idea of introducing me to general aviation and getting me to enjoy it was putting me in the back seat of the airplane while he and his friend flew. No headset, so I didn't know what was going on. No heat in the back seat, so I was pretty cold, and this was in the winter.
Was that your way of making it fun, John?
I don't think I was that thoughtful. I think I was just thinking about having a good time with me and my friend, and just Martha was going along.
And he wasn't going to pass up the chance to fly.
Yeah.
So, and there I was.
Yeah.
So okay, back seat.
Flying just compelled me. If any opportunity to fly, I was going to do it. And if Martha had to pay the penalty of riding in the back seat, that was okay with me. And so she didn't get much attention.
So we got married, and we started a business, and then sold it. And with the money from that, we bought a Cherokee 140, and we learned to fly together and got our licenses, private certificates within 2 days of each other.
Oh, wow.
And I had not yet fallen in love with flying until my first solo cross country. Up until then, I was doing flying with grim determination because I was not going to sit at home while John was out at the airport having fun. And
that's common sense, right? Yes.
Absolutely. I wasn't going to be left out. So I went on this solo cross country, and I left in the afternoon, and I think maybe you had done yours in the morning, and might have been late getting back. I don't remember, and so I went later than I really should have. But I was leisurely on the other end. I mean, it was all of 100 miles from Indianapolis to Richmond, Indiana, which is not very far. And but I lingered at the other end, just unwinding and talking to people, and then came back, and there were a few scattered rain showers, so I detoured to avoid them.
I want to interrupt you for just a little bit. At this point, it's getting dark, and her instructor and I are looking out, and the instructor was very, very concerned. Here's Martha. She's never flown at night, never had any instruction in flying at night, and it's dark, and there's no Martha. And so we're anxiously listening, and finally a radio call comes in, and she reports downwind and base and final, and you can see this light up on final, and the airplane comes in and it goes, makes a beautiful landing. She taxis up and says,
I get out on the wing of the airplane, and I look around, and I say, wow, that was beautiful. And I was hooked.
You were addicted.
And ever since then, John has really kept telling me, I wish you were hooked on jewelry instead. It would be much cheaper.
You don't want that, John. Trust me. Let her within planes. It's better than jewelry.
Martha's in charge of maintaining our airplane. She manages all the maintenance on it and the inspections and so on. And she spends $50,000 without even thinking about it. Jewelry would be a lot cheaper.
Yes, of course. But I'm sorry, you wanted to say
if you want to bring the presentation up, we can walk a little bit through our early days on doing the ground
and you
school.
have the clicker as well. It's right.
Okay. And let's see, got it? Okay, this is the Cessna 340, and this was John and I a long time ago.
What year was this, Martha?
This would have been in 1977. This was 2 years after we started in the ground school business. As John said, we said we would do something for the fun of it until a serious business came along, and for us, the fun of it was we designed a business where we taught pilots, and we flew every weekend to a different city and taught a 2-day weekend ground school where we taught for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. And back in those days, the FAA would come in person to the class, and it was actually a real written test that you took with pencil and paper and give the test. And we did that 50 weekends a year for 10 years. And we were flying the Cessna 340 around while we were doing that, and we couldn't think of a better life on an interim basis than flying ourselves around and talking to pilots.
And our trick was, normally ground school took 6 or 7 weeks, and you'd have to go one night a week for 6 or 7 weeks. And we said, well, we'll do it in a weekend. You just show up in this classroom, and we rented meeting rooms in hotels and did a tour of different cities, going around doing weekend ground schools. And so our trick was getting it done in a weekend. Had to be very efficient. You had to get started on the subject properly, because if you didn't, you'd see all these glassy looks if you screwed it up and confused them. And if you confused them at the start of the subject, you were sunk. You're trying to get this done in a weekend. You had 50 people all. If you think the room was full of 50 idiots, you realize there's only one standing at the front of the room.
And that's how King's School started.
That's how we
started.
started.
Right?
We started originally just using chalkboards in the meeting rooms that we had. This was our first high technology for the day. This was an overhead projector where you put a transparency down on the bottom. Some people in here may be old enough like us to remember that. And it projected up on the screen. Yes. And so we would on the transparencies, we would make copies of in the instrument course approach plates, and we'd draw on it to show weather fronts and stuff like that. And eventually we put the program on video, but still using it for the live classrooms. And up at the front of this room, you can see John on, there's a screen up there with John on the screen, and he's sitting in the back of the room watching the class watch him and laughing at his jokes and turning around to look at him in the back of the room when he tells a joke on video. It was kind of surreal.
I remember your jokes, John. I used to laugh at them at home as well.
Well, so what we decided that we were going to do that was different than everybody else is we're going to take this relatively complicated material and clarify it, simplify it, and make it fun. And that's kind of our unique selling proposition. It's been that way ever since, is that our job is when people get done, they say, wow, that was kind of interesting. I don't see what people think it was so hard about it. And besides that, it was fun. We've done our job. If it seems easy, we did our job. Yes. And our job was to make it seem easy and fun. Yes. And that's what we learned to do in those classrooms. And ultimately, that's what we, as Martha said, by the time we put the courses on video, someone said, well, you guys should put this course on video. And I said, well, that just goes to show you don't know one darn thing about our business, because it won't work on video, because it needs our personal dynamic presence up there in the front of the classroom. And we did our jokes and all of that stuff, and our idea was to make it fun, and we felt we had to be there personally to make that happen. But we had given these classes 500 times, so when we put them on video, it came naturally and they worked.
And the dynamics were spot on between you two. Within the videos, they were perfect. I mean, it was
We got plenty of time for you to talk.
So we were lucky. We were prepared, but we were also lucky because in the early 80s, home videos started coming in. And when we started with a home video camera and just blue curtains in a bedroom of our home. We got a lot of jokes about that as the videos got made. You can guess the color of those jokes. And over time, we got better and better, and we got better equipped, and we ended up with a full studio. The blue behind John there is a blue painted wall. These days we use green, and it's the same technology that the weatherman or weatherwoman uses, where every place that the camera sees that particular color, in this case that shade of blue, it would replace it with whatever video or graphic or chart being shot with a camera, sectional chart that we wanted to use. And that would put a composite image down on the screen. And off to John's right, I'm not sure if you can see it real well, there are some monitors where we can see the composited picture. There's nothing real behind us that we're looking at, but when we look at the monitors, we see us superimposed over the video or the graphic or whatever, and so we know where to point. Just like the weather person
People
does.
often say to Martha and me, John, Martha, you've been in this business 45 years and you're still eating regularly. How is it you're still eating regularly after being in this business for so long? And our answer is two parts. One, we have always solicited feedback from our customers, have been very responsive to it. We used to be that they filled out a postcard. Now they give us electronic feedback. And when we get our feedback, we put it all together and we send it to everybody in the company. Every single person in the company gets feedback that says, John talks too fast. And so John learns to talk slower. So we've been very responsive to that feedback. And that's really designed our courses over time. If people don't like things, we fix them. And so we do flight instructor refresher courses that the FAA that we're doing, and in the FAA.
The FAA supervises us very heavily on that. And when we get the feedback that goes to everybody in the company, we also, at exactly the same time, send the complete unfiltered file to the FAA people in San Diego, where we live, that supervises, and also the office in Washington, D.C., that supervises all of the
so
flight
we
instructor
send that
refresher
feedback
courses.
Directly, not only everybody in the company, but also to the FAA, and without filtering it. The bad stuff is in there as well as the good stuff, and that's a powerful incentive to fix the bad stuff.
Yes,
right.
And the fact you had open ears to the customers' feedback,
yes,
it says a lot about you as well.
So,
yes.
and you have everybody in the company doing it, and everybody gets very motivated to fix the problem.
Yes.
So Martha and I don't have to say we need to fix this problem. The folks
They already know about it.
They are motivated. They come to us and say, we're going to fix this problem. So it's almost self-fixing. Any problems we have, they just get fixed almost automatically.
What video did for us is it gave us the ability to, in a sense, package ourselves in a box.
Wait a minute, hold it.
I remember that in the videos as well.
The second thing that that we have done, I said there's two reasons we're still eating regularly. The second reason we're still eating regularly is that we've kept up with technology. And we've just seen this march of technology through the years, going to video, and then when it became capable of doing it, going to this blue screen behind us. And so we've just been very responsive to changes in technology, and that's the second part of it. Now, did you have something you want to say, dear?
Yes, thank you. So as I say, we could now put ourselves in a box and ship ourselves off to people's homes so that they could watch us on their schedule, and also, if you take a live ground school class, when you walk out of the room, unless you take really fast notes, the knowledge is either in your head or it's gone. And the video gave people a chance to review a lot, which helped a lot on their pass rates and so on. And it let us scale the business up. And we've talked already over the last few days a lot about passion in aviation. Yes. And what the whole business did in part was gave us the ability to pursue our passions in flying different kinds of aircraft. We've been talking about flying the Citation Mustang across around the world.
I want to brag on Martha a little bit. Martha is you can probably tell already, a very assertive person, and also a gutsy person, and she's the first woman to have every category in class.
And John has exactly the same rating. So as far as we know, we're the only couple to have every category and class, not every type rating, but category and class of FAA certificate.
Back up just a little bit. I want to explain. Is this the first slide? No. Just to explain it, both of us have single and multi-engine land and sea for airplanes. And our type ratings underneath that are Falcon 10, Learjet, Citation 500, Eclipse 500S, Citation Mustang. And then we have also rotorcraft as a pilot. We're rotorcraft.
At the ATP level.
These are all ATP privileges and ratings. So we're ATP helicopter pilots. We're also We have commercial privileges for gyroplane. That's the reason they're only commercial, not ATP, is that there are no ATP privileges for those. So gyroplanes, glider, lighter than air. We flew the Fujifilm blimp over the Super Bowl and the U.S. Tennis Open and things like that. And John Madden and I don't remember the other guy would talk about we're the only husband and wife blimp pilots, and we talked about that on the air.
I read that online as well.
What's that?
I read that online, that you two are the only couple in history to
And
ever-
actually, the hardest aircraft of all that we flew, and all of these jets and helicopters, the hardest to fly, it was the blimp. And,
Really?
And the reason is there's great big control surfaces, and you're using just a wheel, so the control pressures were huge. And secondly, a helicopter is very hard to fly.
Very sensitive.
Sensitive, but at least it does what you ask it to do.
Yes.
A blimp doesn't necessarily do that. We'd have pilots come forward and they say, are the controls hooked up backwards on this? Because every time you have the controls to the left, the blimp is going to the right. And he said, well, that's why we have the controls to the left. It just takes a long time for it to respond. So they think we're trying to command it to go to the right. No, it's going to the right, and we're working hard to try and stop it from doing
It has
that.
a mind of its own, huh?
Yeah. And another thing we have is free balloon, and there's no limitations. It's not just gas balloon or hot air balloon. We have both gas and hot air balloons. So the way they do balloons, they don't give you authorizations. They have limitations. If you first get your balloon license, you do it in one with an airborne heater. It would say free balloon restricted airborne heater. We don't have that limitation. So we've got all of those. Now let's go to the next page, Martha and I. We also have endorsements. They don't call them ratings for weight shift control aircraft and powered parachute. There's a weight shift control, and there's a powered parachute.
Wow.
And now let's go to the next one. And now we're flight instructors also in single and multi-engine airplanes, also helicopters and gyrocopters. And we have instrument airplane and helicopter and glider. And we also have ATP helicopter. We talked about that. And then we have the endorsements for, we're instructors for powered parachute and weight shift control aircraft. And I think that's, and also we're ground instructors.
Right. You say it so casually, John. Oh, I forgot this as well.
But we
Excuse
did
me.
all of that accidentally to start with because basically we had a lot of passion about it, and we just enjoyed learning all the different things. And what we learned in seaplane flying related as far as wind awareness and so on to the helicopter and then to the airship, and just the interaction of the knowledge between the different categories and classes was very, very interesting and a lot of fun.
In seaplane flying, you become very wind aware because you don't have runways and you have to land into the wind.
And you don't have any brakes.
And you learn how to read the wind by watching the ripples on the water. That helps you in gliders. That helps you in lots of other things. Blimps.
And one of the reasons we were able to get an airship rating is because we were in a fortunate window where the Fujifilm airship was looking for backup pilots that could come fly with them for events like the U.S. Tennis Open, which runs for like 20, 25 days, and they would be in the air for 18 hours a day, and they needed a lot of pilots to cycle through in order to maintain that. And we had flexibility in our schedule and the ability to get there. And they were interested, in addition to those reasons, they were interested in us because with the helicopter background and the seaplane background, we had the wind awareness and we had the thinking in terms of landing off airports because the airships don't use a runway. They land basically to a ground mast that it gets moored to. And
Well, actually, you land to a crew.
to a crew that then takes you to the mast, but not on the runway.
And that's a very important question, right? With all of your ratings, with all of your endorsements and knowledge in flying all of these different kind of airplanes, does it sometimes get too confusing in terms of knowing all of this knowledge?
Well, if you're in a blimp, you know you're in a blimp. You don't think you're in a helicopter.
It's very easy for us to make the transition between an airplane and or a helicopter or an airship. Where it gets more difficult is when it's more alike. So from the Falcon 10 we fly now to a 172, that can be more confusing than going from the Falcon to a helicopter.
Yes. I believe all of the pilots that have learned from you, and there are millions of pilots all over the world that have learned from you and from King's School as well. When you first started it, and you started it, it shows out of passion. Did you think and expect you would be where you are today?
No, we were
Absolutely
just trying to
not.
eat regularly. We're just trying to make a living.
We really thought in the first place that we would just own a nice job. Because we developed our passion and stayed with it, we got a lot of, we met a lot of really wonderful people, and we've done a lot of wonderful things. This is our Falcon 10 in Khabarovsk, Russia. We flew it around the world in 2004 with 7 stops in Russia. We didn't do the typical Earth Rounders thing. We didn't do it close enough to the equator to get, quote, round the world technically. But we kept going east, and we eventually got back to San Diego, so we count it.
We were told the Earth was round, but as you keep flying east and wind up back home again, it must be round. It kind of proves it. Here's an interesting thing about the blimp, is that you land in the hands of a crew, and it takes about 18 people, I don't remember exactly, 15, 18 people to help do landings and takeoffs in the blimp, because you land to the crew and they use ropes and they kind of haul you in. They're very appreciative when you learn to get real control over it. I mean, otherwise you're dragging them through fields and you could actually injure them. And another thing about this that's interesting, when you become captain of the blimp, what they'll do, they have a ground crew that stands in front of you, and you got all of these people waiting for you, and they lift up the blimp and they let go of it, and they call that a way off, and you're going to see whether it goes up, does it go down, does it pitch forward, or does it pitch back? And so the ground crew chief is looking at you, you're the captain, and you do hand signals back and forth. And basically what you do is you say, what's what they call the static condition of the blimp? Is it statically heavy? If it's not moving through the air, is it going to go up or is it going to go down? What's it going to do? And so you as the captain decide what you want to know is there what we call a weather effect? Is there water on the blimp right now, and is the water going to go away? Is the sun shining on the blimp? If the sun is shining on the blimp, the sun gets hotter than the surrounding air, and it makes it buoyant. It makes it want to go up, and so they call that superheat. It
gives you basically false lift that will go away as soon as you start moving.
As you cool the blimp off by going through the air, that superheat will go away, and so the blimp's now light is going to get heavier. So you're trying to decide: is there superheat now? Will there be superheat later? Is there weather effect now, or the water, or will there be weather effect later? And then you decide how much fuel are we going to use, and what do I want the static weight of the blimp to be when we bring it in for landing? Because if it's too light, you'll tend to carry crew away with you. If it's too heavy, you'd run into the crew. So how long am I going to fly? What's the weather effect going to be when I land? What's the superheat going to be when I land? And then you have just seconds to do that while the blimp crew is all waiting for you and the crew chief is looking you in the eye, and you've got to decide.
What you're deciding is how much ballast in lead shot and bags do you want to carry, and you had 2 places in the blimp, the center and forward, where you could put it, and you have to decide, okay, where do I want it, considering that I'm going to be burning off fuel and so on. And one of the funniest things that I remember in my aviation career is we were still in training, and I was the alleged pilot in command in training anyway. And so I'm up there, and we're getting ready to do a takeoff, and I'm going through all these calculations, and our instructor, it's John McHugh, he's on the right side in that photo, is sitting there letting me do all of this. And we have a crew chief in training also. And so there's this back, and you can't talk to each other. You don't have a company frequency. It's just all hand signals. And so we're going through this procedure of the way off and so on, and we get to this point, and I'm looking at him intently, the crew chief in training, and he's looking at me intently, and I look back at him, and he looks back at me, and neither one of us can remember what we're supposed to do next.
The other thing is, you got all of these people waiting for you while you're doing these calculations in your head. And I remember saying to our instructor pilot, I feel rushed. And he says, oh, no, that they're being paid for that. This is your job. Take the time you need to make a good decision and do it well. And I took that as a great advice. And later on, we got him type rated in a citation jet. And when you're starting up a jet at a busy airport, somebody will come out and marshal you and give you hand directions. And the guy's standing there waiting for us while we're going through the checklist. And John said to me, I feel rushed. And I said, oh, no, he's paid to do that. Don't let him rush you and so on. But I thought it was a great opportunity to get back at him on that.
Right. Well, as John says, we also fly a helicopter. This is the R-22 that we got our certificates in. We had to use a different one for the instrument ratings, one that actually had some instruments in it. The thing that we've done with our ground school courses, basically, I think John said earlier, what we try and do is make aviation accessible to a lot of people with whatever technology is the best way to do it at the time. And so the blue screen technique with us on screen at the same time with the graphics or the video, we found to be a very effective way for training people. And
one of our hokey devices is trying to help people remember things by making things up. So this A, B, C, D, E, G, we made up. And so A is for altitude, that's high airspace. B is big airplanes, big airspace. C is when it's crowded. D is the first time you have to talk to somebody is in a tower. And E is elsewhere, and G is go for it. And so we make that stuff up and helps people remember it.
And you truly simplified it. You really simplified it for the beginner pilot that just wants to know and learn the ground school training. I mean, you did something that no one in this industry did at your time. You integrated technology, fun, simplicity in a very complex world.
What that let us do was scale the whole operation. We wound up with a tremendous privilege of being able to affect the lives of people. One of the greatest compliments I get, how many people in here are pilots? Martha, we're surrounded. Look at this. One of the things I can say is that you folks aren't normal because learning to fly an aircraft is an extraordinary thing. It takes extraordinary commitment over an extended period of time. And it uses everything you have. It uses your emotional capability. One of the things you learn to fly, and when you fly, is to keep your emotions under control. You learn the discipline of disciplining your emotions, so you don't let fear run away with you. You don't get angry. You just control all of that. What an extraordinary group of people that have learned that. And then it takes mental ability, it takes physical ability, and it uses up everything you have. And so what a great privilege it's been for us to play a role in the lives of so many abnormal people. It's just been a great privilege for us. And and with technology, it's become hundreds of thousands of people. We've been in their living rooms. Yes. And it's what a privilege that is for us.
In addition to doing the ground school and the test prep courses, we also do...
Back up, I just want to talk about that other one.
You want to just talk about yourself more, right?
Yeah, right. I'm in that photo. It says, black square, you're there. One of our jokes is, and this helps me, we make this stuff up, but we're on Taxiway Juliet there because it's got a black square. So that's where we are. And I use that when we're taxiing around. That stuff
We try to make up hokey sayings, funny sayings, whatever, just to help people remember, because people remember things better when they're having fun learning it.
Absolutely.
So getting back to me. This is me doing, in addition to the ground school and test prep, we have preparation for the practical test, both the oral and the in-flight. And this is me on the in-flight portion of the practical test. And
for an instrument rating, apparently.
For the instrument rating. And in the right seat, I have Mary Shue, who's a designated examiner out of Portland, who came down to San Diego and taped this. And what we basically do is tape it as if it's an actual check ride through all of the initial paperwork and all of the administration stuff, so you know what the examiner is going to be doing when you go for a check ride, and then the questioning and chart reading, regulations information on the ground, weather, and then we go fly and do everything in flight that a designated examiner might ask you to do when you get to taking your instrument reading.
So the idea is that Martha and I are trying to do a model performance, and so we're trying to fly well, and talk at the same time, and Martha and I are pretty glib talkers. We can talk, but the flying well at the same time is the hard part.
Absolutely.
So this is our homepage, kingschools.com, and just up as an example that all of our courses now are delivered online. We used to do VHS and then CDs and then DVDs, and now we deliver online, and we're doing about 50,000 courses a year that we're delivering online.
50,000 a year. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. How many pilots have you benefited?
Probably hundreds of thousands, probably 1 million. And I hate to say that because there aren't 1 million pilots in the world right now. But one of the reasons we're able to do 1 million pilots over this 40-some years is that there's a pilot turnover. We got some pilots aren't with us anymore. We got new pilots. It's constantly turning over, and we've had a big percentage of all of those. So
Yes.
it sounds like bragging. You say 1 million pilots, but I hate to say it, but
It's true. It is definitely true. I want to spend hours with you, and your experiences and the amount of people you've met and the amount of experiences and stories you have are just phenomenal. But since we have a prayer break coming up, I just want to not be selfish, or I want to try not to be selfish, and to just open the room for some Q&As before we have the break. Prince Sultan.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to welcome these two icons, the kings. Kings, we call them in a kingdom. Supposed to have one king at a time. But I want to say that it's just such a privilege. I got to meet you after buying your course in 1978.
Wow.
One of the cassettes or something didn't work. So do you give money back or anything like that?
You're really getting old, aren't you?
But this is one of the things that I met you last year in Oshkosh in the summer, and that was a wish for myself. I met a lot of great people, country presidents, founders of countries, astronauts, great pilots, and so on. And but you were on my big, very, very short bucket list.
What a privilege it's been.
And the privilege that you accepted to come here all the way to Saudi.
We are humbled and pleased by your praise, and the hospitality and the welcoming here has been just fabulous, and it's a delight to be here.
All of this has given us.
We are live. We are.
All of this has given us some really great stories, and some of them are true.
We are truly honored to have you here, and we have another question over there from Prince Michel. If you can please have the mic.
Michel is one of my latest victims. I got him out of motorcycles, a world-class motorcyclist going around the world by himself, 16,000, 20,000 kilometers.
So he's our Wheels to Wings guy, right?
His new book, Wheels to Wings. And Michel now is an avid aviator, and I think he goes back to motorcycles a lot cheaper.
Yeah, we've cost you a lot of money.
Starting at over 50, studying aviation wasn't easy, but I'm very grateful to your courses. So I was able to finish my BBL, and I was able to finish my multi-engine, and also to get through the instrument ground school, all the exams from first time, and I'm very grateful for that because it was a self-study thing, and I'm really grateful for the programs, and I urge others who would like to study aviation and they don't have time to go through school is to use your programs. And thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We hope to make aviation accessible to people, and certainly aviation knowledge.
And you have, and we are all so honored to have you here. I just want to see a show of hands. How many pilots in this room have learned from the Kings? Oh my God, look at that.
I'm so sorry.
Just
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and we're so honored to have you here, and enjoy your stay in Saudi.
Oh, we're having a great time.
We're having a great time.
Thank you.
Just the prayer, and it's the Jum'ah prayer. Unfortunately, we just have to take the break before our next session, and then we have an incredible panel coming up. And we will see you here after Salat al-Jum'ah, after the prayer of Jum'ah. Thank you again.